It's the night of April 16th, 2003, and Australian agents were on high alert. For the past several months, they had been tailing 3 men that they suspected of drug trafficking. Everything was about to culminate on this night. As they surveyed the dark waters, they spotted something. A freighter was navigating dangerously close to the sharp rocks and reefs offshore. Now this is really stupid, and if you saw it just by itself, alarm bells should be going off in your head. The agents then watched closer and they could just make out something. A small boat was slowly making its way through the choppy waters trying to get to land. Now aboard this boat was 2 men and their cargo, over 100 pounds of pure heroin. And this wasn't an ordinary drug run. These men were employed by the government of North Korea. Now this is a high risk, high reward scenario. At any second the waves could destroy the boat and the cargo, but if they made it to shore and were able to be undetected, then obviously the reward could be huge. Well, the worst happened. The boat capsized. Packages of heroin were now floating in the water. One of the men smacked his head on the underwater rocks and quickly drowned. The other man was still alive and he was determined to get to shore. Swimming around, he found the packages one by one and got all of them except for one. Miraculously, he made his way to shore, and there his contact was waiting to meet him. They quickly loaded the drugs in a car that was parked nearby. Now, after burying the guy that drowned, the 2 men drove to the Grand Pacific Hotel in Lorne. It was right near the coast, and they planned to move on in the morning. But the Australian agents were on the move. They decided to slash one of the tires of the vehicle that was carrying the drugs. What they were hoping for is that the men would move the heroin, taking it out of the car to get to the spare tire. And that would be when Australian police would arrest them. Things did not go as planned though. The next morning, when the 2 men saw the tire, instead of trying to change it, they just hopped in the car and started driving. And so the cops immediately shifted into high gear because they could not let all that heroin get away from them. They caught up to the car and quickly surrounded it, arresting the suspects. 4 days later, the freighter named the Pong Su was intercepted by Australian police and captured. Australian officials had just seized $50 million worth of top quality heroin that was trafficked by the North Korea government. And as you might expect, this incident got a lot of attention. Australia accused North Korea of sending drugs into their country, and predictably, the North Korean government immediately denied all of it. But with all the overwhelming evidence, this incident was the largest one proving that the North Korean government was engaged in illicit drug activity. And when you think about it, it's actually crazy. A government of a country is so broke and desperate that they're selling drugs and doing other illegal stuff just to get by. But to look at how North Korea got to where they are, we have to go back to the 1970s. Okay, so the North Korean government was in pretty bad shape, defaulting on their international debt. They were broke. Kim Il-sung, the definitely democratically elected dictator, ordered all his embassies to be self-sufficient. This means they had to come up with their own money to continue operations. So obviously, the logical next step is smuggling heroin. And this is what a lot of top North Korean diplomats did at the time. But pretty quickly, their schemes started falling apart. In 1976, 12 North Korean diplomats were expelled from Scandinavia for trying to smuggle over 200 pounds of weed. Later on, other diplomats left and right started getting busted for trying to sell opiates. The reason why they were so bold was because they had diplomatic immunity, which means they could avoid prosecution. But the sheer amount of diplomats that started getting caught for smuggling was embarrassing for North Korea, and the busts were hurting their diplomatic prospects. No country wanted to engage with them if they thought the diplomats were smuggling drugs. So the North Korean government had to come up with a different plan. The mountains of North Korea are remote. They have short, cold summers, freezing winters, not very hospitable. It's in these remote areas, specifically Hamgyong and Yangon provinces, that became hubs for drug production. Meth labs were hidden deep in the forests to make drugs. One point that I really want to drive home is just how industrial this drug production became. When you have the power of the government backing meth production, you can operate at a much higher level than small-time dealers. Soon, North Korean police began showing up at farms and forcing the farmers to switch from growing actual food to growing opium poppies. Their promise was that the farmers could sell the poppies for 10 times the price of food, so they could easily just buy it. By 1997, the government ordered all collective farms to set aside 25 acres to grow opium poppies. They would then be harvested and transported to factories. At these factories, opiates and later meth were produced and then plastic wrapped for shipment. North Korean security agencies were involved in guarding the plants and factories, and they were so serious about this operation that they brought in Southeast Asian experts to advise on production. The North Korean government wanted to keep their customers coming back, and the drugs were of extremely high quality to the point where North Korean meth became a sought-after commodity on markets. Okay, so drugs are flowing, but this presents a problem for other nations. They obviously don't want meth flowing over their borders. And it also started to put vocal North Korean supporters like China in a hard spot. How could they keep defending a country that's smuggling meth into their own lands? Soon, there became a curious amount of methamphetamines in northeast China. But despite all the drug seizures and border patrols, officials tried to downplay the presence of North Korean smugglers. They wanted to keep good relations, but it was like North Korea was stabbing them in the back. In 2001, legitimate exports from North Korea to China were $650 million, while illegal narcotics sales were close to $1 billion. China was reluctant, but they finally admitted that there was a drug problem coming from North Korea. Now, when one of your only allies starts to turn on you, you have to do something. So in 2006, North Korea issued a public crackdown on drug offenses, making any level of them punishable by death. They wanted to make the government's stance very clear. Now, were they actually serious about cracking down on drugs, or was it all for show? Well, international drug trafficking incidents started to decline as the late 2000s came into view. And things were quiet for a little while, but that was about to change. Okay, so now it's 2013, and out of nowhere, federal prosecutors in the US unveiled charges against 5 men in a drug trafficking case. And this brought North Korea's drug trade back into the spotlight. The men charged were accused of conspiring to import 100 kilograms of methamphetamines into the US. 2 of the men, Yi Cheong-tan Lim and Kelly Alan Reyes Peralta, were identified as key players in the whole operation. They were part of a Hong Kong-based criminal organization that had a partnership with North Korea, leveraging their drug production capabilities. And this case showed that North Korea kind of switched tactics. After facing huge backlash from the United States and other nations, North Korea had publicly destroyed their meth labs. However, this was all for show. Instead of actually dismantling everything, they simply relocated their operations to new, more discreet places. This allowed them to continue their drug production while keeping the illusion of compliance. And this 2013 case made one thing for certain. While the North Korean drug trade had definitely diminished, it was never gone. The regime had simply adapted its methods, relying more on third parties like the Hong Kong crime syndicate to distance itself from direct involvement. Okay, so now let's flash forward to the present. Right now, the drug trade does not seem to be as prevalent. That isn't to say North Korea isn't engaged in other illegal stuff like weapon sales and hacking. We most likely don't know the full extent of everything they're doing now just to keep afloat. And it also shows yet again how awful the North Korean government is, not even caring about the consequences of thousands of people falling into drug addiction. But yeah, that's all I got. You should watch the next video on your screen. I'll get out of the way.